Okay, so when we're thinking of dominant ideology changing between countries, some good examples might be to look at countries further south, in the Middle East, maybe in Africa, where attitudes to women are quite different. Women in Northern Europe particularly have a greater degree of freedom and control over their lives and tend to occupy positions of authority to a greater extent than they seem to do in Southern Europe and in the Middle East. However, that is changing, and I think it's important to constantly remember that over time things change, and in the West particularly, only 50 to 100 years ago, women occupied positions which were much more subservient than they are now. Also, attitudes to race are different as well. In the Anglo-Saxon countries particularly, there seems to be a tolerance of different races, and in other countries that's not always the case. And those are probably two of the examples I would give. Now I want to think where it's changed over time. Well, I mentioned there that attitudes to women and to race have definitely changed over time. People are less racist, women have greater authority, and attitudes have also changed towards teenagers. At one time, teenagers are a fairly recent phenomenon actually. It used to be that there were children and there were grown-ups and that was it. But in about the 1950s, with the arrival of rock and roll, the teenage revolution happened, and we now have quite a different attitude to youth, whereby we have this new group, as it were, and they can be represented either well or badly. So there are many changes of dominant ideology over time. Where is Goodfellas? Where does it present a world where it does present a world where violence is commonly used and accepted? And I think right from the beginning of the film, it's the casual attitude to violence. None of the characters seem to be shocked by it. Think of the jokes that they make, for instance, when they're digging up Billy Bats about, do you like a leg or a wing? Think about the violence, I think, which is important, that's meted out to Henry by his father when he doesn't go to school. He's thrashed with a belt. The postman has his head put in an oven. The man who is inappropriate with Karen is beaten up with a pistol. Spider is killed for not bringing a drink to Tommy, and at the end of the film, many of the characters are just ruthlessly murdered by Jimmy in a very matter-of-fact way. So, and some of the lines from the film is, underline that getting whacked was just part of what it was about, being a gangster. And I think that we can see that violence as reflecting society at the time, where it was a more violent place, and it was more accepted as part of life. People used to fight more, and there were, clear, it was not the sort of thing that is looked down on as it is today, or seen as such a bad thing. Violence was just part of life. We need now to think of the ethnicity of the main characters in Goodfellas. Well, they're clearly Italian-American, although Jimmy and Henry have got Irish bloods, which is one of the reasons they can't become members of the mafia. And how do their actions and behaviours reflect the dominant ideology of that group? Well, I think their attitude towards the state is interesting. They simply regard themselves as almost living apart from the rest of the country. They have their own, they see themselves as having, effectively, the Goodfellas see themselves as basically the police force for the neighbourhood. They have attitudes towards females which I think are more reflective of Southern Europe and Italy. You have wives, you have girlfriends, and you have mothers who are sort of revered and are always only ever seen in the house, really. So these sort of traditional models of the way females are looked at are very clear when we look at the characters from the film. But you do need to mention the names of the characters, and you do need to mention incidents which point up that, which I'm not going to give you, so you need to think about the film. Okay, I think as well, other aspects of the dominant ideology of that particular group is there is a sort of attitude towards family, which I think is quite distinct. They themselves present themselves as a family. They have two families. They have two families: their main family and then the family of the mafia. So they are very closed off and only see each other, and are loyal up to a point, up to the point where they need to be whacked. And obviously, family is extremely important in Mediterranean societies. How are black people represented in the film? Okay, well, we have that remark. There's a number of things. Firstly, Tommy is discussing a black singer and the fact that his girlfriend, or one of the girls he's with, fancies him, and he looks disgusted at that. There was a man rushes in, when Jimmy's stealing the cigarettes, and says, "Could you believe it? Some effing N-word stole my truck." We have the treatment of Stax, who's eventually killed, who's described as he's getting stoned and hanging out with one of his bitches. And it's seen as, standard behaviour for African Americans. So that's a classic sort of treatment of black people that we'd expect from the time. Now, interestingly, at the end, we see the doctor who looks after Henry when he's been taking cocaine and he's sweating when he goes to hospital to pick his brother up. The doctor looks after him and is treated. The way Henry treats him and the way he's presented is entirely as one would treat a white man. So we can see several things. We can see that Henry's view of black people has changed to an extent, the way he relates to the doctor, but also society now has changed so that we have black people in positions of authority, like being a doctor, and Scorsese makes, I think, a deliberate attempt to present that. Racism is there in Goodfellas all the way through, and it's very interesting to note how it comes out. Other examples of racism are the racism of the Jewish people. There's two examples of how Jewish people are racist towards Henry. Has to cover his cross up, and Tommy says, "Can you believe it? She's prejudiced against Italians," when he's talking about taking a girl out when they go out with Karen. And the Jewish mother is racist towards Italians. "Can you believe how these people live?" she says when she's referring to Italians. So racism runs throughout the film. And as well, when Jimmy's talking about Tommy being being killed instead of being made a gangster, he says this was greaseball shit. In other words, him being made a member of the mafia because of the killing of Billy Batts. In other words, it's clear that this is greaseball shit. That's a negative way of referring to Italians, but it means they feel like outsiders and they are sort of being derogatory about Italians in a way. How examples where attitudes to females have changed over time in the film? Well, as I said at the beginning, you've got this very clear division of female roles, haven't you? The mother, the Jewish mother, the Italian mother, Henry's mother protecting the child, all seen in the home, all seen as very loving, kind, but not painted properly. They're not, if you like, coloured in. They're sort of sketches of characters. They are very stereotypical mothers. They're almost comically, well, certainly the two older ones are quite comically presented, really. He hasn't kept a good meal down in years, the Jewish mother says, and Tommy's mother, is obviously clearly aware that he's in the mafia, but she never refers to it. It's almost as though women are outside of it. They're not allowed into that sort of gangster world. They're sort of kept almost idealised, sort of Virgin Mary on the outside. And I think that's definitely there, as well as the attitude to wives. The wives are just people who have the children and who stay at home. They provide the stability for the husbands, who are then able to go out and do other stuff, which includes having affairs. And they do have, all of them have girlfriends. I think one of the lines in the film is, "We had the girlfriends on the Friday and the wives on the Saturday." So, women are presented in that way earlier in the film, and I think where that's challenged slightly towards the end, I think the representation of Lois as some sort of she's an independent babysitting female, and she sort of argues back with Henry, and she doesn't seem to be either fulfill into any of those stereotypes. She's operating as a single independent woman. I know she's only a small character, but it's important to notice that, to see that Scorsese is presenting changes in dominant ideology throughout the course of that period of history, from the 50s through to the 80s. As well, I think that Karen's character changes during the film. At first, she's with Henry, she's stuck in the house. She's at home. And then towards the end, she walks in with him to a gangster's place and goes, I need a hit. So she's almost like she walks in as an equal to him. She's dressed less sort of elaborately. She's dressed down. She's smoking a fag. So we can see that attitudes to women are changed over the course of time. And I think that will do.